Good morning, everyone. Is this coming through all right? Cool. So I'm going to talk to us today about from kind of come at this from the scientific perspective. Jeff introduced me, but he didn't mention one thing, the most important thing, which is I'm also Isaac's dad. So um, I'm a scientist by training. I'll hold it then. If it's a little too quiet, sure. Is that good? Awesome. All right, let's do it that way. I wasn't trying to decide between on the thing and hold it, and now it's decided. So yeah, so I'm also Isaac's dad. I'm a scientist by training, and yeah, I get the joy of working on this disorder with all of you. So I want to talk about how we can work towards getting a treatment together as a community. So hopefully this advances, and it's not advancing. There we go. That's good. Okay, so when we started iDefine, Jeff talked about that. We put kind of our purpose in our name, which is to define a new future for those living with Kleefstra syndrome. And that involves a lot of things. Part of that is trying to find a targeted treatment, and I'll get into what that means. Part of that is improving clinical care. We all know about the Kleefstra Clinic. And then building community. And those two last things also feed into the first thing. And I think you'll kind of see that as I go through this discussion. So to unlock the potential, which was another term we use a lot at iDefine of people with KS, there's a lot of things we need to do. One of those things is coordinated medical care. One of those things is proper schooling. One of those things is therapies. We all do all these things for our kids. Another is community support, which I hope you're going to feel and experience here. And then you may be using medications if your family member has, for example, seizures, you're going to use anti-seizure medicines. Those are general purpose medicines. But what I'm talking about is a targeted treatment, which means a treatment that is tailored for KS and that works by going after the fundamental underlying mechanism of KS. That is what we dream of. So what a lot of people think that means is you sit and you wait and you hope a drug company comes along and gets interested in your disorder and makes a drug, and then you show up for the clinical trial maybe, or you take it when it's available. But the reality is this. What it actually is everybody, particularly if you're a rare disease, gets together and pushes the system. I tried to find an image with a really large group of people because that's what it takes, but every image with a big crowd of people looked like a riot. So I decided to just go with that one. so so that's what it actually looks like if you're a rare syndrome. You have to all push to get attention and to get people to work on your syndrome. So when I say the system, push the system, what is the system? So we are the patients. There is a whole array of things around us that we have to engage with to get moving. One of the obvious ones is biopharma, so drug companies, but there are many others, researchers, doctors, the government, and we have to be talking with all these groups and getting them to understand our needs and getting them interested in our syndrome and getting them working on it. And so we look at our role is, the patients are our why. We're the gears that help this all move, and also we put oil in there when needed, right? So we're helping this whole system churn because all these other pieces, they don't necessarily work together unless we're making them work. So I wanted to show this. So Terry Jo's actually here, so you can meet her. She's going to be at the Caregiver Village, and so this is something that was really exciting for me to see because Terry's part of the Angelman community. So the Angelman community is a different syndrome. I look at them as like our cousins, right? It's a different gene, it's a different mechanism, but they have a lot of the same challenges. So closer, okay, a lot of the same challenges that our families have. So and this is what Terry posted, is that she wasn't going to be able to attend a big event in DC, and that was because she was with her son at a clinical trial getting the trial treatment. And so that's my dream for our community, is that we're posting the same kind of things, that we're in a clinical trial and we're getting to try something and see if it helps. And that's what I want to point us towards. So I talked about getting all those possible partners, government, biopharma, and so on, interested in what we're doing. So there's two sides to being rare, and one of them is that there are 10,000 rare diseases, and so collectively we're very common. You may hear that a lot. Rare is very common if you look at collectively, but at the same time, if there are 10,000 rare diseases, every partner is going to ask, well, why should I work on yours? It's a really fair question, actually, and it's a question we have to answer. And it's a question we have to answer because we're talking to business people, scientists, clinicians. We have to answer that with facts, figures, data. We can't, we wave our hands, right? And so we have to have good reasons for them to work on ours. And so I'm going to give you 5, and there's others. There's other good ones, but I'm going to give you 5 that we can, 5 ways we can answer that question. One is that we will fund the work. One is that we have good model systems available and ready. One is that we have patient samples ready. Another is that we have the patients organized. And another is that we're ready for a future clinical trial. So, and all 5 of these things can be aided by the community tremendously. The community can make a huge difference in whether or not we can do these things. So I'll take these one by one. So this one's pretty obvious, right? If you fund people to do things, they usually will do them for you. But what I think what's maybe not obvious is that when you fund things, there's often a really great virtuous cycle that ignites, and you don't really have to fund all the work, you have to fund some of the work. And what I'm getting at is when you fund work, you often then, the people that do that work can go off and get additional funding on their own. It's hard, for example, for a scientist to get a grant. They're very hard to get from the government. But if they have preliminary work that they've done that you've funded, then they can use that work to leverage into a larger grant. And so you can then have this great kind of, expanding impact with what you fund. And a great example of that is a concrete example that I can give is, so we, the community, funded the Kleefstra Clinic at Boston Children's, and now there's a sleep study going on. We didn't have to fund that. That funding was funding that the team at Boston Children's could get because they had this clinic. And we have this excellent sleep study going on that we're going to hopefully learn a lot about sleep, which is important. I know I personally experienced that. It's important for a lot of our community. And so that's really exciting that that's happening. And that's the kind of network effects you can get. So please visit the lemonade stand in the Caregiver Village. Meredith, as was mentioned earlier, will be there and take you through how to do fundraisers. And also I've heard there will be lemonade. So make sure to get your lemonade. There's a side benefit. Another one is that we have good model systems available to use right now. And so when I say model systems, let me just take a step back. What I'm talking about is model systems are things you can use in the laboratory to model a syndrome and understand it better, do experiments, and try to understand what's happening underneath, try different potential treatments, et cetera. And one model system that's very common is to develop cell lines. So we've developed 2 patient cell lines, and those are lines that can be turned into other types of cells like neurons. You can grow them in a dish. And so we've funded the development of these cell lines. We have 2 that are available. I want to thank the donors who we reached out to provide the samples to create those cell lines. Both families were just immediately said, sure, how can I help? And so it's really exciting to have those cell lines. We've already had 6 labs now ask for those lines. So those are labs who will start working on doing work in KS that all we have to do is get them the lines. They already are doing interesting work, but they just need the lines. These are expensive to develop, they're time consuming to develop. And if you want a patient line, you need a patient. So this removes the friction for them. They can just ask for the lines, get the lines, and start working on our condition. So this is another way we can get the system to kind of move for us. Another one is we have the patient samples ready to go for study. So imagine if you're a scientist and you'd like to study KS and you need 20 patient samples from 20 patients. Where would you start? Where would you go? How would you do that? That would be a big project. So the idea is you build a biorepository. So the formal definition of a biorepository is a facility that collects, catalogs, stores samples. Generally that's blood. It can be other things. But it removes, again, the friction. If a scientist wants samples, they can apply to the biorepository. Once the biorepository approves, they get the samples and they can start doing work right away. So again, they can start fast and at low cost to them. And then they can do even more exciting things like compare large groups, even across syndromes, et cetera. And you can get all kinds of things out of this. And I won't go into too much detail, but you can learn about fundamental biology. You can establish biomarkers. There's a lot of things that we don't know that we will hopefully learn from work like this. So at this conference, there's going to be a presentation from Simons Searchlight. So Simons is this amazing nonprofit corporation that was started by this philanthropist, this incredible philanthropist who decided he wanted to do something about autism. And so he started Simons, and it's just grown and grown. And now there's Simon Searchlight, which is this basically research program that is building biorepositories for tons of neurodevelopmental disorders. And we are now collaborating with them. And there's an opportunity at this conference both to join Simon Searchlight and do a collection with them. So they will be taking blood. I think we still have a couple slots available, Jeff. Okay, so there's a couple slots available. So please consider, if you haven't signed up, joining up with Simon Searchlight and getting a sample taken at this conference. And they will also be coming and talking more about what they do in another presentation. So they'll give you a lot more detail than I'm going to provide today, but I wanted to highlight that. It's a great opportunity. And I also want to make sure to thank Simons for helping sponsor this conference. They are a sponsor of this conference. So thank you so much, Simons. Another thing we can do is have the patients really well organized. So a really fair question for a partner to ask us is, well, how many are there? How many patients are there? So put yourself in the shoes of someone who's a drug developer. They can't be in the business of going out of business. They can't put millions and millions of dollars to create medicine for 10 people. It's just the economics aren't there. And this is also a fundamental question for us, how many patients are there? Because we want to know kind of how big is our KS family? There are two ways we can try to answer that. It's actually a very hard question to answer. One way is to model it, and the other way is to count directly. And I'll talk about both of those and what we see. So the way you model is you look at the fundamental kind of rules of genetics of DNA variation, and you look at data. There are big studies that have been done doing genetic testing on large groups of people, and you can look at that data and you can build a model. So Dr. Sid, Dr. K, and I, took a look at all the currently available best data, and we ended up at about 1 in 25 to 1 in 35,000 people as KS. Now, that might not seem like a lot of people, but if you look at just the population of the US, that's about 10,000. So that's a lot. We are a big family. And if you look at worldwide, it's about 250,000. So a lot of people, a lot of people. And when people talk about Kleefstra syndrome, in one note, I've seen different ways it gets talked about. So there are formal definitions of what rare is. Kleefstra syndrome is a rare syndrome, just rare. No other modifiers. I've seen it called ultra rare, nano rare, super duper rare, none of those things. It's just rare. It's rare. There are specific definitions for ultra and nano, not super and super duper, but ultra and nano have specific definitions. We are just rare. And it's important that we talk about ourselves as just being rare, because when you say, well, this is ultra rare, that tells people, maybe that's not something I should really be focusing on then. We should have, Jeff kind of touched on this, as a community, we should have the attitude that, yeah, actually, I'm kind of a big deal. So I think that's something to keep in mind when we talk to people. So I talked about modeling, and that gives us an idea of what we expect. And then what can we count? That's another question. So there are two major limits on counting. One is underdiagnosis, still a gigantic problem. And then the other is the need to self-report. You have to raise your hand and say, we're here. So I'll talk about each of those. But right now, just looking at the USA, right, who we can count is a much smaller number. But what we've heard is that that's okay, right? It's okay if we haven't found everybody, because we can't have found everybody. There's not enough people diagnosed, and there's not enough people who are going to raise their hands. But what partners want to see is that number goes up every year, that there's a ramp, and that it's going up every single year, and we're finding more and more people. So that's what we need to be doing. And so the way we can do that is the KS Worldwide Map. So if you haven't joined the map, please join the map. It really does make a big difference, because we have those numbers then, and we can say, we have the patients, we know we can contact them, we know where they are, we can show you where they are on a map, right? And that just is really powerful information for a partner to say, oh, okay, so if I make a drug, I could find patients on the map, and we could invite them to the clinical trial. That's really important. And so we want to keep building out that map over time. So join the map if you haven't. If you have, thank you. We're now up to 634 patients worldwide. This will just keep going up and up, and we need to keep showing that growth every year. So I wanted to come back a little bit to the challenges of why we can't direct count everybody. One of them is underdiagnosis. There's only so much we can do as a single group for underdiagnosis, because we don't know someone has KS until they get a genetic test, till they get the right test. But what we can do is be vocal about supporting projects like Project Find Out, which I'm an advisor for, And this is a project to make genetic testing the standard of care, right? So everybody who should get a genetic test gets a genetic test. If we do that, we will find more people with KS and more people with many other rare conditions, and then we all collectively win. So I just want to make a note about that. Make sure to speak out for these kinds of initiatives, and we've put out notifications about that. The other thing we can do is we can find patients and track patients better in the medical system. The way you do that in the US is you get an ICD-10 code. So we, Dr. Sid, Dr. K, and I got together and applied for a code with the CDC. So the CDC controls these codes. What these codes are, and Dr. Sid is going to go into this in much more depth, but they're basically the way you can track conditions in the medical system, in the computers, and follow people through and understand how many you have and are they getting the right care, et cetera. So we got a code. So this is a huge, huge deal. And they're really hard to get, and I'm sad to say that a lot of the other conditions that try to get a code of the year we went have not gotten one, and so this is something we're going to be now helping all those other folks try to get theirs, because all these rare conditions deserve a code. We got one. Thank goodness we got one. So it's going to be active in October, so it won't be available to you yet, but we've passed out these cards. I think I've got one with me that have the code, that are ready to go, so those should be in your packet. So in October, just around Halloween, think about, just use Halloween, right? After Halloween, you should be able to bring this up with your doctor. It should be in their computer now. Hopefully all the updates happen, but give them the card, say, this is the code, it's just come out, please put this code into the system from my family member. And I mentioned Dr. Sid already, that ensures your family member gets the code and your family member gets tracked properly in the system. And then there's a virtuous cycle, because Jeff had talked about what we want is doctors to say, oh, you have KS, I've heard of that before, but we also want them to say, I've heard of that before and I need to code that properly, because that way everybody starts getting their code in the system, and then all the medical systems have those people tracked properly. And then we can query those medical systems to say, how many do you have? You know, anonymously, they can go through and say, we have X number. And so that means people don't have to raise their hand. There are some people who don't want to, and that's totally fine. I hope they'll change their mind and join the map. But we want to have all those people findable. And then someday, you know, when there's a trial, we want to be able to, you know, offer it to those folks. And so getting that awareness that there's a code and you need to use the code is a really big deal. So finally, I want to talk about clinical trial readiness. So if you're trying to make a drug, it's actually not enough that your drug works. That's not the trick. The trick is you have to prove it to the FDA. That's a different thing than working. And so what is improvement? What is improvement? How do you define that? So the way you define that is that it improves over natural history. So there's a formal definition of natural history, which is the progression of a disease process in an individual over time in the absence of treatment. So if you don't treat, this is what you expect to see. And so obviously you have to study natural history to understand what that is. You have to study patients. So that's doing that, what's called prospectively, is a big project. You have to get a group of patients, follow them, track them, have them come in. There are ways we can do things faster, at least to get a start right now. And that's to do things retrospectively, which is where you ask patients today what has been their experience in different ways. And there's two big efforts that we're coordinating with, and they have two different approaches to this. So RareX is based on surveys. And then Citizen Health used to be called Citizen. So if you've already made contact with this opportunity, don't be thrown by that. They're just rebranding. So with Citizen, now it's Citizen Health. They get that information directly from medical records. And the idea is to pull all that information together and get this comprehensive understanding of what KS is. So who has already joined RareX? If you have, raise your hand. Thank you so much. Awesome. We have a ton of people in RareX. Keep your hand up. Okay, only keep it up if you filled out every single one of your surveys in RareX. Oh, yes. I love you guys. Yes, thank you. So I'm guilty. I haven't done all of mine yet. I've got to finish them up. So if you haven't done them all, please do them. It's important that you do all the surveys, because that's what fills in all the data, right? So if you're on it, awesome. Make sure you do all your surveys. That's doubly awesome. So Citizen, I'm going to just briefly talk about RareX. So 147 patients. Thank you, everybody who's enrolled. That is a fantastic number. I'm not going to go through this figure in detail, but this is the kind of data that you can pull out. And people like Dr. Sid can look at that data and say, oh, this gives me a better understanding of what's happening in this syndrome. It's really important. So I was going to talk a little more in depth about Ciitizen because that's a newer opportunity. So their concept is, like I said, use medical records. And so their sort of secret sauce is they have a bunch of software that can process natural language processing, AI, stuff like that, that can pull in all this data out of people's medical records and then automatically organize all of it, code all of it, and make it all make sense in a database. So the idea of this is you basically get a very organized history for your family member, and that can be then shared anonymously, de-identified, right, at the back end with clinicians, with drug companies, et cetera, to power research. But then you also can use it because you then have this portal into all your information. So it's a double benefit. There's a benefit to you. And in this one, you don't have to do surveys. That's the good news. So you create an account. It's pretty straightforward. Just a pro tip. One great thing to have when you're creating an account, a list of all the doctors your family member has seen. And as we know, that's a long list. And then what they do is so you put all those doctors into the system, and then they reach out to all those medical offices, and they pull in the records from the medical offices. They scan them all in, and then they put together this profile. So it's really pretty straightforward to actually get started with, and pretty low lift. So please join up with Ciitizen. And then I wanted to talk about one other thing that we've done recently to be ready for a clinical trial. And so we talked about improvement. Well, there's two sides to improvement. The first is proving it to the FDA. The second is, what do we think improvement is as a community? That's really important, and the FDA thinks it's really important. So they're doing what now it's called patient-focused drug development. So that is, from the beginning, they want to see that there was engagement with the patient community and asking the patient community, what would you think is important, right? I think we all might have somewhat different answers to that question, but we need to get a handle on what does the community generally think. And so one of the ways that you can do that is pretty well established now. It's called the disease concept model. And so we worked with Boston Children's, Boston University, to do a disease concept model study. And Kristen Connors, who did that study, is here today and is going to talk about that study. And it's so great. So thank you to everybody who did the study and it was interviewed for that study. It involved interviews. The data is really cool, and I can't wait for her to share it with you. But it really then puts us in a position to say, not only do we have the patients, we know what's important to them, we know what would be improvement to them, what matters to them. So I'm going to go through the checklist of kind of things you should be thinking about just immediately for this conference. Visit the lemonade stand. Keep answering the call. Thank you so much. I love this community. I love the response we get. Everyone's always just like, how can I help? And that makes such a difference. Sign up for Simon Searchlight, grab one of those available spots to do a donation to the biorepository. Join the MAP, fully participate in RareX and Citizen Health, all these things, and just keep being amazing. You guys are amazing. You're doing a great job. What I can tell you, is that I can see the movement that's happening. We are all pushing on this system, and it's starting to move for us. So we are getting noticed. People are paying attention to us. Drug companies are starting to get interested in us. It is really exciting to see that happening. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of where we are and where we're going. So we are on this road together. And that road is going to go forward for a while. It also goes back and back, right? So KS is something we know about because the technology changed. We can do genetic testing now. It's been with humanity forever. We're the first generation that knows about it. We're the first generation that can do something about it. I can tell you how many people are going to be born today with KS. Remember, I talked about modeling the number of people that we have. I can also, from that data, tell you how many are going to be born today. In the world, it's going to be 10. Today, tomorrow, the day after. Decades from now, they're going to look back and they're going to say, this was the generation that could do something about it. And they did something about it. And I think that's an amazing privilege, and I hope you do too. So thank you so much. So I have the honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Kleestra to you all. She's going to talk next. So I think she probably needs no introduction